Picture the heavy blue plate with its three little walls, one wide section for the meat and two narrow ones for the sides. For more than 30 years, it carried lunch across America, from railroad dining cars to the corner diner with steamed-up windows. A working man could set down a quarter, sometimes 50 cents, and walk away full. Meat, 3 vegetables, a slice of bread, a cup of coffee, all on one plate. Number 19 on this list was the plate every steam table kept hot for the noon rush. Number 13 fed a whole shift of factory men on their lunch break. And number 4 on this list was the one waitresses called out before you sat down. These were the plates many of us grew up on, plain and filling and cheap. Then the counters closed and the blue plate slipped from memory. That is the reason few people remember it, but it is not gone yet. So hit subscribe and let's lift the lid, because here are 25 forgotten blue plate specials for seniors who miss eating out for $1. Number 25. The meatloaf plate. No diner special carried a working man through the afternoon quite like this one. Ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs and a little egg, baked in a loaf pan all morning, then sliced thick and laid against a scoop of mashed potatoes. The cook ladled brown gravy over the whole plate, never measuring, just tilting the pan until it pooled in the divided sections. Green beans or stewed tomatoes filled the third well. It cost about 35 cents through the 1940s, and it stretched a cheap cut of meat into a real dinner, which is exactly why diners loved it during the lean years. Regulars came back for it on the same day every week because the cook ran a Monday loaf, and a Thursday loaf you could set your watch by. Then chain kitchens swapped the loaf pan for a microwave tray, and the slow-baked version slipped away. The real thing took all morning and tasted like it. Number 24. Liver and onions. Few plates split a counter the way this one did, loved hard by some and dodged by everyone else. Calf or beef liver hit the flat top and cooked in under 3 minutes, which made it a cook's best friend during the noon rush. The trick was the onions. They went on first and cooked low and slow until they turned soft and sweet. Then they were piled over the liver to soften its sharp bite. Doctors of the day pushed it as iron-rich food, and families took that to heart, so it showed up on diner menus across the country as a cheap and filling lunch. It rarely passed 35 cents. Working folks ate it because it was honest fuel, not because it was fancy. Younger crowds turned away from organ meat by the 1970s, and the dish quietly left most menus. The onions are what made it worth ordering. Number 23. The open-faced hot turkey sandwich. This plate brought Sunday dinner to a Tuesday afternoon, and that was the whole point of it. Slices of roast turkey were laid over white bread, then the cook smothered the bread, the turkey, and often a scoop of mashed potatoes under a flood of pale gravy. You ate it with a fork, never your hands because it arrived swimming. Diners ran it because they roasted turkey in the back anyway, and the open-faced trick stretched a few slices into a full meal that cost them almost nothing. It sold for around 45 cents in the 1950s. The plate gave a factory worker the feeling of a holiday table on an ordinary day, gravy and all, for the price of pocket change. Cafeterias kept it alive longer than diners did, but it faded as turkey became a once-a-year bird. The gravy was the entire magic of it. Number 22. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Soldiers had a blunt nickname for this one, and the men who came home from the war ordered it anyway. Thin slices of dried, salted beef were torn into a creamy white sauce, then ladled hot over toasted bread until the bread went soft underneath. That was the whole dish. It cost the kitchen pennies, since dried beef kept for weeks without spoiling, and a little went a long way in all that cream. Diners loved it because it cooked in bulk in one pan and held on the steam table through a busy morning. It fed truck drivers at dawn and mill workers at noon for a quarter or less. The salt and the cream and the warm toast made it taste richer than its price had any right to. Then convenience foods crowded it out, and the dried beef jar disappeared from most kitchens. A few old diners still chalk it on the board for the regulars. It was poor man's comfort, plain and warm and filling. Number 21. Shrimp Wiggle. The name alone tells you it came from a more playful kitchen than today's. Canned shrimp went into a creamy white sauce with a handful of peas, Then the whole soft mix was spooned over white toast or rice. Church cookbooks and even a USDA pamphlet of the era printed the recipe, which is how far it traveled. Diners near the coast served it as a cheap way to put seafood on a plate without paying for fresh catch. The dish let a landlocked family taste shrimp on a budget, which felt like a small luxury in a working town. Tastes turned against canned shrimp by the 1960s, and the wiggle wiggled right off the menu. The name survives mostly in old recipe boxes now. It was novelty and thrift on the same warm plate. Number 20, Swiss steak. Nothing about this plate came from Switzerland, and that confusion is half its charm. The name came from Swissing, an old word for pounding and rolling a tough cut of beef until it surrendered. The cook hammered round steak thin, dredged it in flour, then braised it for hours in stewed tomatoes and onions until a fork could cut it. By lunch, it fell apart in its own thick sauce. Diners ran it because a cheap, chewy cut became tender and rich with nothing but thyme and a low oven. It landed beside mashed potatoes in the wide well of the plate, with the tomato gravy filling every corner. Working families ate it on the nights money was tight, since one piece of tough meat fed the whole table. It sold across counters through the middle of the century for well under $1. Slow braising fell out of fashion as kitchens chased speed. The patience was the recipe. Skip it, and you just have boiled beef. Number 19. Salisbury steak. This was the plate every steam table kept hot for the noon rush, and there was a reason for that. Ground beef was shaped into a thick oval patty, browned hard on the flat top, then finished in a pan of dark onion gravy where it could sit and stay warm for an hour without drying out. A cook could line up a dozen of them and serve a packed counter without missing a beat. The dish was named for Dr. James Salisbury, who pushed ground beef as plain, healthful food back in the 1800s. It came with mashed potatoes and a vegetable for around 50 cents in the 1950s. Hungry men ordered it because it was hot the second they sat down, and it filled the divided plate corner to corner. The TV dinner version later cheapened the name. Done right with real onion gravy, it still holds up. Speed and comfort rarely shared a plate so well. Number 18, City chicken. Here is a plate that promised chicken and never had a feather in it. During the Depression, pork and veal were cheaper than poultry, so cooks cubed those scraps, pushed them onto a wooden skewer, breaded the whole thing, and fried it to look like a little drumstick. It was a clever trick dressed up as a treat. The dish stuck around Midwest and Rust Belt diners long after the hard times passed because families had grown to love it for its own sake. It came breaded and golden in the wide well of the plate, with mashed potatoes and gravy filling the rest. Folks in mill towns ordered it on payday as a cheap stand-in for a fancier cut. The skewer was the whole giveaway, a city joke about country food. Cheap poultry eventually made the disguise pointless, and the dish faded outside a few loyal neighborhoods. Some old Polish and German diners still serve it proudly. It was thrift pretending to be a holiday. By the way, real quick before the next one, if these old diner plates are stirring something up, the full recipe guide for this channel has a stack of these counter classics written out the way the cooks actually made them, no shortcuts. The link sits right below this video if you want to bring one of these home this week. Now, back to the countdown. Number 17, chicken fried steak. Walk into a busy diner at noon, and this was the plate you heard before you saw it. The cook took a thin cut of cube steak, pounded it flatter with the edge of a heavy spatula, then dropped it into the seasoned flour and pressed it down. When it hit the hot grease, the whole counter knew. The sizzle rose up sharp and steady, loud enough to cut through the clatter of forks and the hiss of the coffee urn, and the smell of frying batter rolled all the way to the front door. The steak came out crackling and golden, the breading shattered like a thin crust under the fork. Then came the gravy, a peppery white river ladled straight from the pan, pooling over the meat and spilling down into the wide well of the heavy blue plate. In the two narrow sections beside it sat a scoop of mashed potatoes with its own gravy crater and a spoonful of cream-style corn. The three little walls of that divided plate kept everything in its place, the way they had for 30 years across 1,000 counters. A man could lean an elbow on the worn formica, watch the waitress chalk the special on the board, and eat the whole thing for under $1. The breading soaked up the gravy at the edges and went soft, and that soft corner was the part regulars saved for last. This was cheap beef made tender by a hammer in a hot pan, dressed up to look like fried chicken because fried chicken cost more. It filled a working man for an afternoon of hard labor and asked almost nothing of his wallet. The plate is the reason few people remember how loud and generous a real diner lunch could be. Fast kitchens later swapped the hand-pounded steak for a frozen patty and lost the sizzle entirely. The noise was the promise. Number 16. Chicken a la king. This was the plate that let a plain lunch counter pretend it was a hotel dining room. Chunks of cooked chicken went into a creamy white sauce loaded with mushrooms, sweet peppers, and peas. Then the whole rich mix was poured over toast points, rice, or noodles. It started life as a fancy hotel dish in the early 1900s, but by the middle of the century, every diner with a steam table ran a version of it. Cooks liked it because it used up leftover chicken and held warm all through the lunch hour without breaking down. The red and green peppers gave the pale sauce a touch of color that looked dressier than the price. It let a factory worker eat something that sounded grand for the cost of a regular plate. Banquet halls and cafeterias kept it going for decades, smothering everything from biscuits to vol au vents. It finally aged out as creamy casseroles fell from favor. The fancy name was the best part of the bargain. Number 15. Hungarian goulash. Long before pasta nights had a name, this was the plate that turned a tough cut and a tight budget into supper. Cubes of cheap beef were browned, then simmered low for hours with onions, paprika, and tomato until the meat went soft and the sauce turned deep and red. Diners ladled it over egg noodles and called it a meal. Immigrant cooks from Central Europe brought the dish into American kitchens, and it spread fast because it stretched a little meat across a lot of plate. One Texas grill listed it as a house specialty for 95 cents back in 1949, paprika and all. It filled a hungry crowd cheaply, and the paprika gave a plain bowl real warmth. American goulash drifted toward ground beef and macaroni over time, and the long-simmered original faded. The paprika is what set the real one apart. Rush it, and you just have brown stew. Number 14. Salmon croquettes. Payday or not, a can of pink salmon could become a proud plate in the right hands. The cook flaked canned salmon, mixed it with breadcrumbs, egg, and a little onion, then shaped it into patties and fried them crisp and golden. 2 or 3 croquettes filled the wide well, with mashed potatoes and a creamed pea sauce alongside. Diners ran them because canned fish was cheap and kept forever, so the plate cost almost nothing to put up. Southern lunch counters in particular leaned on salmon and even leftover meat croquettes to turn scraps into something that looked made on purpose. They sold for well under a meat plate, and a working family could eat fish without paying fresh catch prices. The crisp shell and soft center made a humble can taste like a treat. Frozen fish sticks and changing tastes pushed the croquette off most menus by the 1970s. A few church kitchens never let it go. It was thrift, fried into something golden. Number 13. The hot beef commercial. This was the plate we promised you, the one that fed a whole shift of factory men on their lunch break and never let one of them leave hungry. Slices of slow-roasted beef were piled between or over white bread. Then the cook buried the whole thing under a heavy ladle of brown gravy. Mashed potatoes went on top of the same plate and got their own gravy, so the wide well ran like a small flood. Truck stops and blue-collar diners across the Midwest called it the commercial, a plate built for men who worked with their hands and counted every minute. It came fast, it came hot, and it came cheap, usually for well under $1 through the 1950s. A man could eat it in 15 minutes and stay full until the whistle blew at quitting time. The roast in the back made it possible, since the kitchen carved from the same joint all day. It survives in pockets of the upper Midwest under that old name. It was a full day's fuel for the price of a coin. Number 12. Smothered pork chops. Few diner plates rewarded a slow cook the way this one did. Cheap, bone-in chops were dusted in flour and browned hard on the flat top, then settled into a skillet of onions and pan gravy where they cooked down low until the meat pulled from the bone. The onions melted into the gravy and turned it thick and sweet, and that gravy got ladled over the chops and the mashed potatoes beside them in the wide well of the plate. A spoonful of greens or applesauce filled the last section. Cooks ran them because a tough bargain cut became tender supper with nothing but onions and patience, and the smell of them browning pulled folks in off the sidewalk. They sold for around 45 cents through the lean middle decades, when a chop on a plate still felt like a small reward for a hard week. Boxed shake and bake later sold speed instead of slow gravy, and the smothered version slipped off most boards. The gravy was the whole reason to order it. Number 11, Yankee Pot Roast. Sunday dinner for a working family showed up here on any weekday a diner felt like roasting. A tough chuck roast was browned, then braised for hours with carrots, onions, and potatoes until a fork did all the carving, and the pan juices cooked down into a deep brown gravy. The cook sliced it thick against the grain and laid it in the wide section of the plate, with the soft braised vegetables crowding the two narrow wells. Diners leaned on it because one cheap roast fed a dozen plates and held warm on the steam table straight through the noon rush. It carried the feel of a real home supper to men who ate most lunches alone at a counter. It sold for well under $1 across most counters in the post-war years. Slow braising lost ground as kitchens chased faster turnover, and the all-morning roast faded from the daily board. A few New England diners still chalk it up the old way. The patience was the recipe, plain and simple. Number 10, Stuffed bell peppers. Here's a plate that turned a handful of cheap groceries into something that looked fussed over. Green peppers were hollowed out, packed with a mix of ground beef and rice and onion, set upright in a pan, then baked under a blanket of tomato sauce until the peppers slumped soft and the filling set. Two halves filled the wide well of the plate, with mashed potatoes or buttered bread rounding it out. Diners and cafeterias ran them because a little ground beef stretched a long way once it was bound with rice, and the peppers held warm on the steam table without falling apart. The tomato sauce gave the whole plate a homemade look that cost the kitchen almost nothing. It fed a hungry crowd cheaply and felt fancier than the price on the board. Tastes drifted toward faster, handheld food, and the baked pepper plate quietly left most menus by the 70s. Church suppers kept it alive longer than diners did. It was thrift dressed up in a tomato coat. Number 9, hamburger steak. Long before the drive-thru, this was the plate that gave ground beef the dignity of a knife and fork. A thick patty of seasoned chuck was pressed flat and seared hard on the grill, then crowned with a heap of onions cooked soft and brown right beside it. No bun, no ketchup, just the patty laid in the wide well of the plate next to mashed potatoes and whatever vegetable the cook had going. It came cheaper than a true steak, which is exactly why a working man ordered it when he wanted the feel of one without the bill. It rarely passed 40 cents through the post-war years. Diners loved it because they could grind their own trimmings into patties and waste nothing off the cutting board. The hamburger eventually ran off to the bun and the basket, and the open plate version got left behind. It was the poor man's steak, and it ate like one. Number 8, beef stew. Nothing emptied a cook's odds and ends quite like a deep pot of this. Cubes of cheap chuck were browned, then simmered low all morning with potatoes, carrots, onions, and whatever else the kitchen had to use up until the broth turned thick and the meat went soft. It got ladled steaming into a bowl set in the wide well of the plate, with a thick slice of bread for sopping. Diners ran it because one cheap pot fed the whole counter and only got better as it sat through the lunch hour. Workers called it honest food, the kind that stuck with a man through an afternoon of hard labor. A bowl with bread rarely cost more than 30 cents. Canned and frozen versions later sold the name without the morning of simmering behind it. The long, slow cook was the entire difference. Rush it and you just have soup with meat in it. Number 7, stuffed cabbage rolls. Brought across the ocean in the heads of immigrant cooks, this plate carried the old country into American diners. Tender cabbage leaves were wrapped around a filling of ground beef, rice, and onion, then packed tight in a pan and simmered low in a sweet and sour tomato sauce until the leaves went silky and the bundles held together like little parcels. 2 or 3 rolls filled the wide well of the plate, the tomato sauce pooling into the narrow sections beside a scoop of mashed potatoes. Diners in mill towns and immigrant neighborhoods ran them because a small amount of beef fed a whole tray once it was stretched with rice and wrapped in cheap cabbage. They held warm for hours, which made them a steam table favorite. Working families ordered them for the taste of home at a counter price. Tastes narrowed and the patient rolling fell out of busy kitchens, so the rolls drifted off most American menus. Polish and Eastern European diners still serve them with pride. The wrapping was the patient's, and you could taste it. Number 6. Ham steak with red-eye gravy. Southern counters made a whole plate out of a thick slice of cured ham and a splash of leftover coffee. The ham hit the hot griddle and seared at the edges, and once it came off, the cook poured a little black coffee into the pan to lift the browned bits, then let it cook down into a thin, salty, reddish gravy. That gravy got spooned over the ham and the grits or potatoes beside it. Diners loved it because it used cheap cured ham and the dregs of the coffee urn, wasting nothing on a busy morning. It fed field hands and railroad men at dawn for a quarter and change. The salt of the ham against the bite of the coffee gravy made it taste bolder than its price. Country ham got pricey and taste shifted, and the red-eye plate thinned out beyond the rural South. The coffee in the pan was the whole trick. Number 5. Braised short ribs. Today, these turn up on white tablecloths, but they started out as a poor cut a diner could afford in bulk. Meaty beef ribs were browned, then braised for hours in a low oven with onions and a little tomato until the meat slid off the bone and the sauce turned deep and glossy. The cook piled them into the wide well of the plate over mashed potatoes, with the rich braising sauce spilling into the corners. Diners ran them because short ribs were a bargain butcher's cut back then, cheap because they took time and trouble most home cooks skipped. A working man got a rib-sticking plate for well under $1 in the post-war years. The cut climbed the menu later and the price climbed with it, so the old counter version quietly disappeared. What was once poor folks' beef became a special occasion order. Time on the stove was the only luxury it ever needed. Number 4. The fried chicken plate. This was the one we teased at the start, the order the waitress called out before you sat down, and the one that turned every head at the counter. Pieces of chicken were rolled in seasoned flour and dropped into a deep skillet of hot grease, where they crackled and spit until the skin went deep gold, and the kitchen filled with a smell that pulled folks straight through the door. 2 pieces landed in the wide well of the plate, with mashed potatoes and a pool of cream gravy in one narrow section, and a scoop of greens or corn in the other. Diners ran a fried chicken special on set days, and regulars planned their week around it, because hand-fried chicken took real work and tasted like Sunday on a Tuesday. It sold for well under $1 through the post-war years and sent a man back to the mill full and grinning. Then fast food buckets and frozen tenders made the skillet feel slow, and the from-scratch plate faded from most counters. The crackle of that skillet was a promise the whole room could hear. Number 3. The macaroni and cheese plate. Down at the cheap end of the board sat the plate that fed a family for almost nothing and never disappointed a child. Elbow macaroni was folded into a sauce of milk and melted cheese, spread in a pan, then baked until the top browned and a crust formed at the edges. The cook cut a thick square and set it in the wide well of the plate, often beside stewed tomatoes or a slice of bread. Diners and cafeterias ran it because flour, milk, and a little cheese made a filling plate that cost the kitchen pennies and held warm all afternoon. It worked as a cheap main for the budget crowd or a side for the meat plates, doing double duty on a busy line. Working families leaned on it hard when payday was still a few days off. The boxed powder packet version later replaced the baked pan and lost the brown crust entirely. That crusty top was the part the kids fought over. Baked slow, it was comfort you could afford any day of the week. Number 2. The breaded pork tenderloin. Out across the Midwest, this plate hung off the edges of itself and still cost next to nothing. A slice of pork loin was pounded out wide and thin until it spread far past any plate, dredged in cracker crumbs, then fried until the breading went crisp and golden and shattered at the touch of a fork. On a plate, it came open-faced over mashed potatoes, the giant cutlet draped past the rim with a scoop of slaw or corn tucked in the narrow section. Diners ran it because a small, cheap piece of pork pounded thin looked enormous on the plate, all size and crunch for a bargain price. A man got an eyeful of food for well under $1, which made it a payday favorite in mill towns. The crisp breading and the soft pork underneath made a humble loin taste like a feast. It survives loud and proud as a sandwich in Iowa and Indiana, but the open plate version thinned out. Pounding it thin was the whole show. Number 1, chicken and dumplings. Topping the list is the plate that tasted most like somebody's grandmother had been at the stove since dawn. A whole stewing hen, too old and tough to roast, was simmered for hours until the meat fell off the bone and the broth turned rich and golden, and then the cook dropped in spoonfuls of soft dough that puffed up into pillowy dumplings right in the pot. It got ladled steaming into the wide well of the plate, chicken and dumplings and all that thick broth together. Diners ran it because the cheapest, oldest bird on the rack made the whole pot, and one hen fed a counter full of hungry men. It filled a working family to the brim for a quarter or two through the lean years. Canned versions and busy kitchens chased the long simmer right out, and the from-scratch pot grew rare. It was the warmest, cheapest comfort the old counter ever set down. Toast with bacon drippings carried the rich memory of breakfast into evening meals, using saved fat that thrifty households never discarded. During the 1940s through 70s, seniors understood that bacon grease collected in jars beside the stove was liquid gold for flavoring and spreading. A slice of bread was toasted until golden, then spread while warm with a thin layer of cooled drippings seasoned with salt from countless previous cookings. The fat melted slightly into warm bread, creating savory richness that satisfied hunger and stretched resources. Some seniors sprinkled their dripping toast with black pepper or topped it with tomato slices when gardens were producing. The flavor was deeply porky, slightly smoky, and wholly comforting to those who remembered when nothing edible was ever thrown away. This single slice often served as complete supper when appetites were small. Toast with bacon drippings represented waste-nothing kitchens where every ingredient served multiple purposes. Nobody under 50 has heard of the egg and olive sandwich, but mention it to a woman who attended a church potluck before 1970 and watch her face change. Chopped green olives folded into creamy egg salad, the brine cutting through the richness of yolk, made this a fixture at ladies' luncheons and covered dish suppers through the 40s and 50s. Hard-boiled eggs mashed with a fork, a handful of manzanilla olives, mayonnaise, a dash of paprika. It went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, arranged with the kind of precision that said presentation was its own pride. Jars of stuffed olives cost pennies, and every kitchen had one. The sandwich disappeared when formal gatherings stopped and convenience foods took over. Nobody killed it. The world just moved too fast for crustless triangles. Number 11, Frito Pie Skillet. The Frito-Lay publicity team served Frito's chili pie to the Dallas Dietetic Association in 1949, and the recipe ran on millions of red and yellow bags in 1962. Heat a can of chili, pour it over a pile of corn chips, top with grated cheese and chopped onion. By the late 60s, working mothers in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma were making the skillet version on weeknights when nothing else was thawed. Brown a half-pound of ground beef in her seasoned pan. Stir in a can of pinto beans and a small can of tomato sauce with a shake of chili powder. Pile a bag of Fritos right on top of the simmering chili. Cover with a fistful of shredded cheddar. Lid on for 2 minutes to melt the cheese. Spoon it straight from the pan onto 5 plates. Buttered noodles satisfied hunger with the simplest combination of starch, fat, and salt, asking nothing of the cook beyond boiling water. Seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s kept boxes of egg noodles in their pantries for evenings when cooking felt like too much, but hunger insisted on attention. The noodles were boiled until tender, drained thoroughly, then returned to the warm pot where butter was added along with generous salt and pepper. The butter melted into warm pasta, coating each strand with glossy richness that tasted more indulgent than ingredients suggested. Some added dried parsley for color or grated cheese when budget allowed. The entire preparation took under 10 minutes and produced a bowl of comfort that filled empty stomachs without taxing limited energy. Buttered noodles were honest food that never pretended to be more than what they were. For seniors eating alone, this simple dish provided warmth on nights when elaborate cooking was impossible. Your grandmother made the banana and mayonnaise sandwich the same way every time. Ripe banana sliced lengthwise, a thick spread of Duke's mayo, 2 pieces of the softest white bread in the house. In Southern kitchens from the 1930s through the 70s, this was as common as sweet tea. The combination sounds wrong to modern ears, but the creamy tang of mayo against the sweetness of ripe banana was something close to perfect. It cost almost nothing. A single banana ran about 2 cents during the Depression, and mayo stretched across every meal. Dale Earnhardt Jr. still talks about eating them, but he describes them the way you describe something from another world. You either grew up with it or you didn't. And if you didn't, nobody could explain it. The woman who made yours is probably gone now. The sandwich left when she did. Number 5. Corned beef hash. The dish came out of New England Irish kitchens in the 19th century as a way to use up the boiled corned beef and cabbage from a Sunday dinner. By the 1860s, a cheap restaurant in America was called a hash house, and the cooks behind the counter were hash slingers. Wartime rationing in the early 1940s pushed canned corned beef into every grocery shelf, and grandmothers in Boston, Providence, and Hartford turned it into a one-pan Tuesday supper. Dice the meat, dice a cold boiled potato, dice an onion. Brown the whole pile hard in her iron pan until a dark crust formed on the bottom. Crack 2 eggs right onto the top and lid the pan for 3 minutes. The yolks broke when you cut into the hash, and that was the sauce. Welsh rarebit in its quick version brought pub-style comfort to kitchen tables, requiring only cheese, milk, and toast to create something surprisingly sophisticated. Seniors who remembered this dish from earlier decades simplified the traditional recipe into something achievable in under 10 minutes. Sharp cheddar was grated and melted slowly in a small saucepan with a splash of milk, dash of Worcestershire sauce, and sometimes pinch of dry mustard. The mixture was stirred until smooth, then spooned generously over toast placed on a plate. The cheese sauce pooled around bread, creating a dish part soup and part sandwich, eaten with knife and fork. The flavors were bold and savory, the texture rich and comforting. For seniors eating alone, Welsh rarebit felt like treating yourself to something special without leaving home or spending much money. This dish transformed ordinary pantry ingredients into something that tasted like care and intention. In the 1930s, 2 things sat in nearly every American pantry: a jar of peanut butter and a jar of mayonnaise. Someone put them together on bread, and the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich became a survival staple that lasted decades. The richness of peanut butter against the tang of mayo creates something unexpectedly balanced, almost savory, with enough fat and protein to carry a body through hard work. Skippy hit shelves in '33. Miracle Whip arrived the same year, and both gave families affordable staples that stretched across every meal. Kids ate these 5 days running because there was nothing else, and complaining about food was something you did not do. The sandwich held through the 50s, mostly in the South, where Duke's mayo and thick peanut butter on white bread was as ordinary as breathing. It slipped away not because anyone turned against it, it just got buried under the choices that came after the lean years ended. Number 28. Slumgullion. The word showed up in Mark Twain's 1872 travelogue Roughing It, where he used it to mean a watery stew served to gold miners. By the time the Depression hit, the name had attached itself to a thick beef and noodle pot that hobos shared along the railroad lines through the Dakotas and Montana. Grandmothers who fed men off the boxcars in the 1930s kept making it long after the trains stopped bringing strangers. Brown a pound of ground beef in a deep skillet. Throw in a chopped onion, a green pepper if you had one, a can of tomato sauce, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a cup of dry elbow macaroni. Cover the pan. Walk away for 20 minutes. Some families called it American goulash. Some called it just supper. The name moved with the people who carried it, and the recipe stayed almost the same from Pennsylvania to the Pacific. It was the supper a woman could put together with one hand on the spoon and the other on a child's shoulder. Cottage cheese and canned fruit became staple supper for seniors who needed protein without cooking effort and welcomed sweetness without dessert guilt. This combination required nothing more than spooning cottage cheese onto a plate and arranging canned peach halves, pear slices, or fruit cocktail alongside. The curds provided protein and calcium, while fruit offered vitamins and comfort of something sweet. During the 1950s and 60s, this was considered health food, recommended by doctors for patients needing gentle nourishment. The cottage cheese came in different curd sizes according to preference, and canned fruit ranged from budget brands to premium varieties. Some seniors added cinnamon or honey when company feelings struck. The cost remained minimal, since both ingredients kept well and stretched across multiple meals. Cottage cheese and canned fruit represented the intersection of economy and nutrition that practical seniors navigated daily, providing satisfaction without demanding time or energy. There was a type of father, Midwestern usually, often a veteran, who built his Braunschweiger sandwich with a quiet ritual that bordered on ceremony. Pumpernickel or dark rye, toasted, a thick smear of the smoked liverwurst, pink, gray, and dense, straight from the tube, spicy brown mustard in overlapping lines, a slice of raw onion, maybe tomato if the garden had one. Braunschweiger came from the German town of Brunswick, and by the time it reached America, it had become a Midwest dad staple, the sandwich their wives tolerated and their kids refused to try. The smell was unmistakable, pork liver and caraway and smoke filling the kitchen at 6 in the morning while coffee brewed. Oscar Mayer still makes it, but the stores that stock it are fewer each year. If you grew up watching your father eat this sandwich, eyes closed, completely content, you carry that image somewhere specific. He probably never asked if you wanted one. He already knew. Number 9. Skillet tamale pie. California ranch wives and Texas farm mothers in the 1930s built this one out of a Mexican idea and an iron pan. Brown a pound of ground beef with a chopped onion in a deep skillet. Stir in a can of stewed tomatoes, a can of whole kernel corn, a fistful of olives if you had a jar in the cellar, and a teaspoon of chili powder. Whisk up a quick cornmeal batter in a separate bowl with 1 egg and a cup of milk. Pour the batter right on top of the simmering meat. Lid on. 20 minutes on a low flame. The cornmeal puffed and set into a soft yellow crown. The recipe ran in Sunset magazine in 1942 and showed up in every junior league cookbook from San Diego to Tulsa by 1955. 1 pan to wash. 1 supper for a long table. Sardines on crackers represented pantry cooking at its most practical, requiring nothing more than opening a tin and arranging contents on whatever crackers were at hand. For seniors living alone during the 1960s and 70s, this combination offered complete protein and essential oils without any cooking whatsoever. The tiny fish came packed in oil, water, or mustard sauce depending on preference, and a single tin stretched across 2 meals when appetite was small. Saltine crackers were the traditional base, their neutral flavor providing contrast to the rich, briny fish. Some seniors added lemon juice or hot sauce to brighten flavors. Others mashed the sardines with a fork, creating a spread that distributed more evenly. The entire meal cost pennies and provided nutrients doctors recommended for aging bodies. Sardines on crackers were consumed at kitchen tables by people who understood that dignity in dining came from adequacy, not extravagance. The first thing you noticed was the color. Pink bologna studded with bright green circles of pimiento stuffed olive, sliced thin at the deli counter. Olive loaf was a lunchbox favorite from the late 60s into the 70s when supermarket delis carried cold cuts nobody asks for anymore. The loaf blended beef and pork with coriander, mace, and black pepper, whole manzanilla olives pressed in before cooking. Kids ate it on white bread with yellow mustard, salty, briny, with a sweetness from the pimiento you didn't expect. Oscar Mayer made one. Boar's Head made one. Both discontinued it. Dietz and Watson and Eckrich still produce it regionally, but you have to know where to look. If your mother packed olive loaf, you either loved it or traded it at the cafeteria. Either way, you haven't seen it since. Number 12. Bubble and Squeak. British war brides who married American GIs and shipped over to Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Boston between 1944 and 1947 brought this skillet trick with them. Yesterday's boiled potatoes and yesterday's boiled cabbage went into a hot pan with a generous spoonful of bacon drippings. Press the whole thing flat with the back of a spoon. Let it sit untouched on a medium flame for 6 minutes so a brown crust formed on the bottom. The name came from the sound the cabbage made hissing against the hot iron, which the English had been calling bubble and squeak since at least 1762. Flip the slab once, crust the other side, slide it onto a plate and crack a fried egg on top. Supper out of 2 leftovers and a pat of grease. Milk toast was the quiet companion of countless evenings spent alone, a dish so simple it seemed too humble to call dinner. Yet for seniors watching every penny during the 1950s and 60s, this warm bowl delivered exactly what tired bodies needed. Stale bread was never wasted in those kitchens where thrift meant survival. Slices were toasted lightly, placed in a shallow bowl, and covered with warm milk heated with butter and a pinch of salt. The bread softened into something between solid and liquid, easy to eat for those with dental troubles or diminished appetites. Some added sugar or cinnamon when sweetness was needed. The cost was negligible since milk and bread were pantry constants, and preparation took barely 5 minutes. Milk toast carried memories of childhood sickbeds and mothers tending fevered children. For seniors eating alone, this bowl meant warmth without fuss and nourishment without pretense. She buttered the bread first, always. Then the sugar, white, granulated, poured from the bag and pressed into the butter with the back of a spoon until the crystals caught. The butter and sugar sandwich was the after-school secret of every kid who grew up where the grocery money ran thin by Thursday. Nobody called it a recipe. You just knew. The crunch of sugar against soft bread, the way it dissolved on your tongue, the faint salt of butter underneath, that was the reward for making it through another day. It showed up in mining towns and mill villages during the Depression, and it never really left. Through the 50s and 60s, kids in Appalachia, the rural South, and factory neighborhoods from Detroit to Pittsburgh still came home to this. Some used brown sugar, some added cinnamon, some just used whatever bread was going stale because waste was something those kitchens refused. Number 13. Spanish rice with hamburger. This was the pot that needed nothing more than 1 onion, a half cup of rice, and whatever meat was wrapped in paper at the bottom of the icebox. Brown a half pound of ground beef in her deep skillet. Drop in the chopped onion. Add a half cup of dry, long-grain rice straight from the cardboard box. Pour in a can of stewed tomatoes and a cup of water. A shake of paprika from the red tin. Lid on, 25 minutes on the lowest flame. The rice drank the tomato juice, the meat scraps stretched themselves across a family of 5, and the supper cost about 40 cents in 1958 money. Texas grandmothers cooked it on weeknights and called it Spanish rice without ever crossing the border. Cinnamon toast delivered sweetness and warmth in under 5 minutes, becoming the default supper for seniors who craved comfort without complexity. The preparation was almost meditative. Bread was toasted until golden, then spread immediately with soft butter that melted into the warm surface. Sugar and cinnamon, pre-mixed in small jars kept near the stove, were sprinkled generously over the buttered surface. The heat caused the sugar to dissolve slightly, creating a thin, sweet crust that crackled between teeth. Some seniors placed their cinnamon toast under the broiler to caramelize the topping into something approaching candy. The aroma alone lifted spirits on difficult evenings. This was comfort food in its purest form, requiring nothing fancy and delivering everything needed. For widows and widowers eating alone during the 1950s and 60s, cinnamon toast meant dessert and dinner combined into one affordable, satisfying meal that tasted like childhood remembered. In every small-town grocery from the 1940s through the 70s, there was a tub of bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, prepackaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that bologna by hand. Number 8. Skillet Spam Hash. Hormel started canning Spam in 1937 in Austin, Minnesota, and by 1944 the company was shipping 15 million cans a week to American troops in the Pacific. When the boys came home, they wanted the taste of the chow line on a Saturday night, and their mothers and young wives obliged. Dice a half can of Spam into rough cubes on the wooden board, brown them hard in her iron pan until the edges caramelized and the kitchen smelled like the inside of a mess tent. Add a chopped cold boiled potato. Add a yellow onion diced fine. Press the hash flat. Let it crust on the bottom for 4 minutes without touching it. Flip the slab once. Crust the other side. Crack 2 eggs right onto the top. Lid on, 3 minutes. Hawaiian grandmothers cooked the same hash on Sundays after church and called it home. Creamed eggs on toast transformed breakfast ingredients into satisfying supper that cost almost nothing and came together in under 10 minutes. Seniors who survived the Depression understood that eggs were among the most affordable proteins, stretching further when combined with simple white sauce. The preparation began with melting butter in a saucepan, whisking in flour until smooth, then slowly adding milk while stirring until thickened. Hard-boiled eggs, already prepared and waiting in the refrigerator, were chopped and folded into this creamy base with salt and pepper. The mixture was spooned over buttered toast while still warm. The result was rich, filling, and deceptively elegant for something made from such humble ingredients. This dish fed widows and widowers across America during decades when eating alone meant cooking economically but eating well. The eggs provided protein while the toast gave substance, and the sauce made everything feel like someone had taken care. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. Number 14. Liver and onion skillet. Beef liver was the cheapest cut at the A&P meat counter in 1953, less than half what a chuck roast brought the same week. German and Polish grandmothers in Milwaukee and Buffalo bought a pound of it on Thursdays and cooked it on Thursday nights when there was nothing else cheap left in the icebox. Dredge thin-sliced liver in flour, seasoned with salt and pepper from the wooden mill on the counter. Slick a big iron pan with a spoonful of bacon grease saved in a tin can on the back of the stove. Lay 2 sliced yellow onions in first and let them go soft and brown for 10 slow minutes. Push the onions to one side. Lay the floured liver in the open hot half of the pan. 3 minutes aside, no more, or it turned to shoe leather. Heap the onions back over the top. One supper, one pan, one dish to wash. Stewed tomatoes on toast brought garden flavor to supper tables using canned tomatoes that cost pennies and required almost no preparation. Seniors who had canned their own tomatoes during summer or purchased store brands during lean times understood this humble ingredient's versatility. The tomatoes were heated in a small saucepan with butter, salt, sugar, and sometimes torn bread pieces that thickened the liquid into something approaching sauce. This warm mixture was spooned over buttered toast that soaked up the juices gratefully. The combination provided vitamins, fiber, and comfort of something warm and savory. Some seniors added black pepper or Worcestershire sauce to deepen flavors. Others kept things simple, letting tomatoes speak for themselves. The dish appeared on tables across America during decades when making do meant making delicious from almost nothing. Stewed tomatoes on toast proved that a can of tomatoes and bread slice could become something worth sitting down to eat properly. You could smell a liverwurst sandwich from across the cafeteria, that dense mineral scent announcing itself before you opened the wax paper. Liverwurst and raw onion on rye was a deli standard from the 1940s through the 70s, common as pastrami in neighborhoods where German immigrants had settled. The sausage was soft enough to spread, ground from pork liver with black pepper, marjoram, and allspice, sliced thick at the counter. You ate it on dark rye with spicy brown mustard and onion rings sharp enough to water your eyes. In the Midwest, sweet pickles went on top. In the Northeast, dill. Either way, it was a working man's lunch, filling, cheap, strong enough to carry you through the afternoon. Boar's Head stopped producing it entirely in 2024. The old German delis that sliced it fresh are closing one by one. If your father ate liverwurst, you remember the smell. You probably never made one yourself. Number 29. American Chop Suey. New England kitchens borrowed the name from a Chinese restaurant idea and turned it into the cheapest weeknight supper a tired woman could put on a table. The first printed recipe ran in the Alton Evening Telegraph in Illinois in August of 1910, with ground beef, a can of tomatoes, an onion, and macaroni. By the 1950s, Milltown wives in Massachusetts and Rhode Island were cooking it on Friday paydays when the meat budget was already spent. 1 pound of Hamburg browned in her seasoned pan. A chopped onion went in next, then a can of tomato sauce and a box of elbows that cooked right in the same pot. 40 minutes from coat hook to table. The leftovers went into a lunch pail wrapped in waxed paper, and nobody complained because nobody had anywhere else to be. Peanut butter on crackers provided complete protein and staying power without requiring a single pot or pan. Seniors living on fixed incomes during the 1960s and 70s kept jars of peanut butter in their pantries as insurance against hunger. Saltines, graham crackers, or Ritz crackers served as the canvas for this thick, sticky spread that required some effort to eat, but rewarded patience with satisfaction. The peanut butter could be spread thin for economy, or thick for indulgence depending on the day's mood and the jar's remaining contents. Some seniors drizzled honey over their peanut butter crackers, or added sliced banana when fruit was available. The combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrate kept blood sugar stable through long evenings. This meal required no cooking, no cleanup beyond a knife wiped clean, and no particular skill. Peanut butter on crackers represented pure practicality, transformed into genuine sustenance for people who understood that simple did not mean inadequate. Of all the sandwiches that disappeared, prune butter might be the one that deserved a better reputation. Stewed prunes mashed into a dark, sticky paste and spread across day-old bread. That was a school lunch in the 40s and 50s, packed by mothers who knew dried fruit was cheap, filling, and wouldn't spoil in a tin pail. Some added cinnamon or a smear of butter to soften the intensity. Some mixed in chopped walnuts for texture. The result was dense and sweet, almost like jam, but earthier, with a chewiness that made it feel like real food instead of candy. Kids traded these away at the cafeteria table faster than anything else in the lunchbox. Prune had already become a punchline by the 50s, and no child wanted to be caught eating one. The mothers who packed them knew the nutritional value and didn't care about the jokes. They were feeding their kids on pennies. The kids who threw them away wished now they'd paid attention. Number 6. Skillet Hamburger Pie. This was the pot that stretched a single pound of ground beef across 5 plates and a packed lunch. Brown the meat in a deep iron pan with 1 chopped onion. Drain off the grease into the tin can on the stove. Stir in a can of cut green beans straight from the cellar and a can of cream of mushroom soup. Spread the meat flat in the pan. Heap a bowl of mashed potatoes over the top, edge to edge. Slide the whole pan into the oven for 20 minutes until the potato peaks browned. Cut into wedges like a real pie. 1 slice for each child, 1 for the husband, 1 wrapped in waxed paper for the lunch pail next morning. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers turned a simple egg into an interactive meal that brought small pleasure to solitary dining. Seniors who grew up with this British-influenced tradition continued preparing it well into later years, finding comfort in the familiar ritual. The egg was lowered gently into boiling water and cooked for exactly 3 to 4 minutes, producing set white and gloriously runny yolk. Meanwhile, toast was prepared and cut into narrow strips called soldiers, ready for dipping. The egg sat in a small cup, its top carefully removed to reveal golden liquid within. Each toast soldier was dipped into the yolk, emerging coated in rich goodness that made plain bread taste extraordinary. The meal cost almost nothing yet felt ceremonial, requiring attention that gave structure to evenings that might otherwise blur together. For seniors eating alone, the process of dipping and eating provided small entertainment alongside nourishment. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. Number 7. Mock oyster stew. Coastal New England grandmothers in the 1920s and 30s had the real version with fresh shellfish, but inland farm wives in Kansas and Nebraska had never seen an oyster in their lives. They used canned salsify, sometimes called oyster plant, which tasted faintly briny when boiled. Slice the salsify into coins. Drop them into a wide pan with 2 cups of whole milk, a knob of butter, a few grains of salt, and a few grindings of pepper. Heat slow until the milk barely steamed. 12 minutes total. A handful of crushed oyster crackers floated on top of each bowl. The whole supper came together for next to nothing in 1936 and tasted enough like the ocean to satisfy a homesick prairie woman. Bread and milk bowl was perhaps the oldest and simplest supper in the American pantry, dating back centuries and persisting through every economic hardship. Seniors who remembered harder times often returned to this dish when cooking seemed too effortful and appetites had shrunk with age. The preparation required nothing more than tearing bread into pieces, placing them in a bowl, and pouring cold or warm milk over the top. Sugar was sprinkled according to taste, transforming the humble combination into something approaching dessert. Some preferred their bread and milk warm, heating the milk gently before pouring. Others liked it cold, especially during summer months. The bread softened quickly, becoming easy to eat with a spoon, gentle on sensitive stomachs and aging teeth. This was food stripped to its essence. For seniors eating alone, bread and milk represented self-sufficiency and comfort of familiar flavors, asking nothing and giving everything a tired body needed. Cold baked beans mashed between 2 slices of bread. That was a factory worker's lunch in every mill town from Fall River to Flint. British immigrants brought the habit to American shores, and it settled into the lunch pails of men who worked 12-hour shifts and needed something that held together in a tin box until noon. The beans were Saturday night's leftovers, thick with molasses and salt pork remnants, scooped cold onto buttered bread and pressed flat. Sometimes a tomato slice if the garden was producing, sometimes a leaf of lettuce, mostly just beans and bread. A 1929 sandwich cookbook recommended them mashed smooth with mayonnaise and chopped onion for variety, and dozens of factory towns had their own versions, some with a drizzle of vinegar, some with a smear of mustard across the top slice. The taste was sweet, salty, dense, the kind of lunch that sat heavy in your stomach and kept you standing through the shift. When the factories closed and lunch counters replaced pails, the baked bean sandwich quietly left the table. Number 10. Polish sausage and cabbage skillet. Milltown grandmothers in Hamtramck, South Chicago, and Cleveland kept a ring of kielbasa from the corner butcher in the icebox most weeks of the year. On a Wednesday, when the meat money was almost spent, they sliced the whole ring into thick coins and laid them in a hot iron pan to brown in their own fat. Half a head of green cabbage shredded thin went in next, a halved yellow onion sliced thick, a few cracks of black pepper. The cabbage cooked down in the sausage fat for 15 minutes with a lid on, and the supper smelled like a Polish church basement in November. A boiled potato split open on the side of the plate caught the pan drippings. The whole pot fed 6 people for under $1.25 in 1964. Hot cereal with butter transformed humble oatmeal or cream of wheat into something almost luxurious on cold evenings. Seniors who grew up during the Depression understood that hot cereal stretched further than almost any other food, filling stomachs for pennies per serving. The cereal was cooked according to package directions, usually with water when milk needed stretching, then transferred to a bowl where a generous pat of butter was added along with salt, rather than sugar. The butter melted into golden pools on the surface, adding richness that made plain grain taste almost decadent. Some seniors stirred everything together while others let the butter remain in patches, each spoonful offering different proportions of creamy and plain. This savory preparation was common among those who preferred evening meals without sweetness. Hot cereal with butter represented economy and comfort combined, asking almost nothing of the cook while delivering warmth on evenings when loneliness felt sharpest. If the tongue sandwich required a butcher's skill, this one required nothing but nerve. Peanut butter and dill pickle on white bread, the sandwich that sounds like a dare but tastes like a discovery. It came out of the Depression when lunch counters paired whatever was cheap and shelf-stable, and the combination turned out to work in a way nobody expected. The New York Times called it a thrifty and unacknowledged American classic. The acid of vinegar brine cuts through the fat, the crunch of pickle breaks the density, and the whole thing hits a sweet, sour, salty balance that makes you take a second bite before you've understood the first. Pregnant women kept it alive for decades. The craving is practically a cliché. But this was a pantry staple long before anyone tied it to pregnancy. You don't need to be craving anything. You just need to trust the people who came before you. Canned soup doctored with extras became an art form among seniors who understood that a simple can could become a proper meal with small additions. Campbell's tomato soup, cream of mushroom, or chicken noodle served as the base, but the magic happened in what came next. Leftover rice stretched cream soups into something more substantial. Crushed crackers thickened tomato soup while adding texture. A handful of frozen peas or a chopped hard-boiled egg transformed chicken noodle into something approaching homemade. Some seniors added a splash of milk to cream soups or a spoonful of butter to tomato. The entire preparation took under 10 minutes and produced a bowl of warmth that felt cared for rather than merely opened. For seniors eating alone, this small act of doctoring represented agency and creativity, turning industrial convenience into personal comfort. The soup might have started in a can, but it ended as something that tasted like someone had bothered to make it special. If peanut butter and mayo was about stretching what you had, the Welsh rarebit was about turning almost nothing into something that made you forget you were poor. Sharp cheddar melted into a sauce with beer, Worcestershire, dry mustard, and cayenne, poured hot over thick toast and browned under the broiler until it bubbled. That was lunch at every diner counter from the 20s through the 70s. The name came from Britain, a working-class joke. Welsh families who couldn't afford rabbit ate melted cheese and called it by the name of what they wished they had. It crossed the Atlantic and became a fixture of American lunch counters and hotel cafes where a block of cheddar and a bottle of beer fed the whole table for pennies. Campbell's even sold canned cheddar soup that housewives poured over toast and called rarebit. The real sauce took 5 minutes: flour, butter, cheese, liquid, seasoning, but tasted like an hour of work. When fast food came and meat got cheap, diners dropped it for turkey clubs. The hot, messy beauty of rarebit didn't survive the drive-thru. Cheese and crackers with apple slices assembled a complete supper without any cooking whatsoever, satisfying seniors who valued simplicity above all else. Sharp cheddar or American cheese was sliced from a block and arranged on a plate alongside saltines or wheat crackers. An apple, sliced into wedges and sometimes dipped in lemon juice to prevent browning, added freshness and fiber to the arrangement. The combination provided protein from cheese, carbohydrates from crackers, and vitamins from fruit in proportions that doctors would approve. This was particularly popular during summer months when heating the kitchen seemed unbearable, and appetites ran small anyway. The plate looked almost elegant despite requiring no skill beyond basic knife work. Seniors could eat at their own pace, assembling each bite according to preference. Cheese and crackers with apple represented the dignity of a composed plate rather than random grazing, turning simple ingredients into something that felt intentional and proper for people dining alone. Beef tongue on rye with horseradish and pickle was the most expensive sandwich at Mid-City Delicatessen in Manhattan during the 50s. 75 cents, top tier, same price as turkey. Jewish and German delis displayed whole tongues in their cases through the 60s, sliced to order by men who knew exactly how thin to cut. The meat was braised for hours until tender, peeled, and chilled, and the texture was unlike any other cut, silky, rich, with a depth that regular roast beef couldn't touch. You ate it cold on dark rye with horseradish sharp enough to clear your sinuses, a half-sour pickle on the side. It was whole animal butchery at its finest, a cut nobody wanted, turned into something people paid premium prices for. Katz's Deli in New York still serves it, but most people now would rather not think about where their sandwich came from. That squeamishness killed a craft that took real skill. Tomato soup with saltine crackers was perhaps the most iconic simple supper of the 20th century, warming generations of seniors through countless solitary evenings. The soup came from a can, usually Campbell's, diluted with milk for richness or water for economy, then heated in a small saucepan until steam rose from the surface. Saltines were crushed directly into the bowl or floated whole on top according to preference, their salt cutting through the soup's sweetness, while their texture provided something to chew. Some seniors added a pat of butter that melted into golden swirls on the red surface. Others sprinkled black pepper or stirred in a spoonful of rice left over from another meal. The entire preparation took 5 minutes and cost almost nothing, yet delivered comfort disproportionate to its simplicity. Tomato soup with saltines represented security itself for seniors who knew this meal would always be possible regardless of budget or energy levels. Drop into any old diner that still keeps a steam table warm and order the special, because that is where we found these plates still hiding out. Most of them never made it into a cookbook, just a chalkboard wiped clean every night and written fresh the next morning. There was a line the old counterman used when a regular sat down without a menu, and it tells you everything about what the blue plate really was. They would just nod and say, "The usual." 2 words, and a full hot meal landed in front of you for the price of a coin.